Hello, and welcome to Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. This program will celebrate breakthroughs like the vaccines that are speeding up the global recovery from COVID-19. It will shine a spotlight on innovators who are at the cutting edge of their fields. And it will help our global audience reimagine what's possible in science, technology, public policy, and more. Over the next 2 hours, you'll meet founders in digital money and biotech, two areas where we expect to see dramatic shifts over the next year. Congratulations to all the 2021 Bloomberg New Economy Catalysts, and I look forward to seeing you at the forum in Singapore this November.
Hello from New York. I'm Caroline Hyde. It is a joy to be your host for part 2 of the Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst virtual event. Now, over the course of the 6-hour program, we're introducing you to a group of dynamic, visionary entrepreneurs, scientists, policymakers from all over the world. They are catalysts indeed. They inspire new ideas, fresh thinking, novel approaches to old quandaries. But most importantly, they incite action. Now, at Bloomberg New Economy, we take a cautiously optimistic view on the future of humanity, informed by a wave of entrepreneurship accelerated by the pandemic. Of course, COVID-19 has cost millions of lives and destroyed countless small businesses around the world. But out of this catastrophe, New Economy puts the planet first. It prioritizes food security, access to healthcare, to finance. It considers equity to be paramount. And all of these impulses are driven by, revolutionary advances in technologies, AI, gene editing, robotics. Now, over the course of this virtual gathering, we will show you how our catalysts are tackling the world's most pressing issues in the areas of climate, agriculture, e-commerce, even space. And in this session, we're going to be focusing on digital money, you know it, the hottest investment trend in finance today, and biotech, which is literally transforming life itself. Now, to kick off our digital money focus program, we asked people from all over the world if digital money will go mainstream, replacing or competing with traditional currencies. Take a listen to what we heard.
The transition from traditional to digital assets allows people around the world, no matter their socioeconomic background, to directly access and harness the power of one global digital economy.
Digital money becomes revolutionary and potentially groundbreaking because the new digital technologies can allow central banks to cut out the middleman. Digital money's future and benefits will therefore depend on whether our democracies can put the commercial banks in their place or forever suffer under their feudal power.
Digital money will inevitably replace the traditional money. And in fact, the trend has already started even before the introduction of digital money. If you look at countries like Sweden, China, UK, they are all making a lot of progress towards cashless.
Though given that the vast majority of our money is already in digital form, one wonders if we actually need a whole set of new currencies or whether turning off the physical printing press will achieve the same outcome.
It's really quite hard to imagine governments giving up monetary sovereignty and control over the financial system.
I think crypto assets and public blockchains like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and then some of the protocols that we're finding in the DeFi space is really giving us an opportunity to build a new open financial system, a new infrastructure that will enable us to have a more open and inclusive financial services industry.
I think we, as human beings, are in the process of this grand immigration from the physical world to a digital world.
Starting from the first world countries and the second world countries and the third world countries, especially for second and third world countries, the impact of digital money can be huge.
Digital currency has been very helpful to especially developing countries because developing countries didn't have credit cards, but we now have ways of accessing money.
Very interesting comments there, and thanks to all who took the time to actually respond to us. And now, before we introduce you to our catalysts, I should explain that each segment of our program is divided into 3 parts, where we seek to answer, 3 big questions. 1, what matters? Then, what's next? And what if? Join us on this journey with our catalysts as we discuss the challenges, dive into the solutions, and dream big about what's possible over the horizon. You will have the opportunity to participate in the conversation through the chat box and polls on the right side of your screen if you are joining us on the platform, or through social media at #Bloomberg Catalysts. And with that, I want to go to our first What Matters interview on the making of Southeast Asian super app. Now, Grab started out as a ride-hailing company that has rapidly moved into fintech and logistics. Bloomberg TV's chief international correspondent for Southeast Asia has Linda Amin talked to Grab co-founder and group CEO Anthony bring their lychee crop to market before it went bad, to making loans to a struggling Thai restaurant.
We're excited to have Anthony Tan, founder of Grab, which is the most valuable startup in Southeast Asia. First up, Anthony, congratulations on the SPAC.
Thank you so much, and thank you for letting me be here.
I want to go back to the very beginning. Back in 2012, you were looking to solve a messy taxi problem in Malaysia. Safety was an issue, drivers weren't making money, and you saw an opportunity.
You're totally right. There were some really big local problems, and that local problem was just a humble ask to say, hey, I want to be able to commute safely to work. So my co-founder, Ling. Ling used to work for a consulting firm that made her work late at night, and when she took a taxi at home, back home, she had to literally pretend to talk to her mom so that the driver would know somebody else is on the other line. And we said, look, this has to be solved. We have to create a much safer mobility solution where anyone feels safe to commute. But then by doing that, as we signed up more and more driver partners, in fact, I personally signed up many of them, we also realized, wow, they didn't have bank accounts. We had to help them set up bank accounts. We had to help them obtain financing to get their first smartphone. They never even had a smartphone. And it was this early insight that gave us an understanding, wow, they have been quite excluded from the financial services that you and I have been very blessed with. So we said, how many of these people are underserved from the existing financial institutions out there? So as we signed up more and more driver partners across, we said, hey, this is a natural adjacency so that we can help small businesses, we can help them be included in the financial system. So again, just focus on solving big local problems.
So you've ventured into financial services, including digital payments. You now are part of a consortium with a digital bank license. How much has the pandemic advanced digital payments, you think? I mean, we talk about an acceleration. Give us a sense of what has been achieved.
Sure. Just to give you a sense, according to Euromonitor, in 2020, we were the number one app by GMV for online food deliveries, ride-hailing, and digital wallet payments across the region. And we're just doubling down on that. For us, we can see that being the category leader is obviously something that is important to us, because being the food delivery category leader, by knowing the data of how well a food merchant does, this was something that a lot of traditional financial institutions couldn't offer. Micro loans to help them grow their business, but we could, where we said, hey, we understand how much you've made. We understand that it's come down or gone up because of COVID. And we said, because of the data, we could see, and we were comfortable with the risks because we understood the cash flows. We said, we're willing to lend you. And because of that, I'll give you an example where a merchant called Khao Gang, which is a Thai restaurant in Bangkok, which was very affected by the movement control measures. When they reopened, they didn't even have capital to buy ingredients. But because we understood them as a Grab food merchant partner, we had access to their data. We understood their daily sales. We could determine how much credit and even help that owner, him, calculate daily repayment amounts automatically so he could pay the loan on time and help grow that business.
The thing is, technology is a double-edged sword, right? We talk about how it can help financial inclusion, but it can also deepen inequality. How are you looking at that issue?
In fact, I like to point out that it's actually helped a lot of businesses that couldn't afford this type of help or couldn't access this type of help. If you look at merchants, for example, as I shared before, they couldn't access this, but couldn't access working capitals, but now they can. That's just one example. Another example is farmers. Say farmers in Vietnam, for example, recently because of the movement control restrictions, a lot of lychees, as a category, was about to completely expire, was gonna get spoiled, and we created one we call the Summer Signature Fruit Campaign in Vietnam, and we helped farmers sell over 100 tons of fresh lychee in 5 days, because our tech platform could connect multiple parties, enable lower cost of distribution to help farmers grow, help them ensure that their produce doesn't get spoiled, help. Government was very happy with us. Our businesses, so many of the Gongchas of the world, the bubble tea that you would buy, were buying lychees for their bubble tea from us. Consumers were happier, merchants were happier, we were happier. So there is a way where technology can actually help reduce distribution costs, create access, and everyone wins together.
Because there's so much potential, it's not surprising that we have seen an invasion of new fintech players, but we also know that the banks are fighting back. They now have a digital strategy of their own. How do we look at this? How will this play out? How do fintechs and traditional banks coexist?
Well, I don't see it as one or the other. In fact, Southeast Asia is still highly underbanked, highly underserved. Many people are not in the financial system. Many don't even have a credit profile, unlike in highly developed markets like the US. And non-traditional platforms like Grab can really fulfill this need well, where we have the blessings of providing high frequency, daily essential services, whether it's mobility, whether it's food delivery, grocery delivery. And because of that, we have access to unique data. At the same time, we also have the largest driver network across the region. And this helps give us unparalleled access across 400 cities. As we gather more and more from these nodes all across 400 cities, we have data points like how much flexible workers or small businesses earn, how often they work, how regular or irregular. That gives us that sense of credit worthiness. That makes a big difference. Now, we partnered banks to help them. A lot of times, sometimes we provide the lending just by Grab. A lot of times we partnered banks to provide these working capital loans. And again, being the category leader in food helps us give this information into our AI machinery to build insights. And these insights are then, we partnered banks on how we could provide these merchants with loans. They are obviously attracted to us because what you might ask, why are banks attracted to us? They are attracted to us because there's a lot of distribution. There's a lot of access that they usually wouldn't have. They have insights that they couldn't access before that we can provide. And while they are experts on specific financial products, example, we partnered UOB and Maybank for card solutions depending on countries, or Citibank for loans. We partnered with MUFG, which has one of their subsidiaries, Krung Sri in Thailand, to offer our driver and merchant partners loans. So we will continue to partner and find ways to build the ecosystem together.
Right. I'm just wondering, are there policies that can help? Because we're still a long way away from realizing the full potential of tech for financial inclusion.
Yeah, you're right. I think regulation is very important. How do we continue to, number one, leverage on our partnerships with the governments to provide clearer regulation so that fintech firms can innovate within these clear regulatory boundaries and protect consumers at the same time. That's very, very important. Number two is, I would say, financial literacy. Making sure that consumers in the region understand what they're signing up for. I'll give you an example. In Southeast Asia, it's one of the lowest financial literacy in the world. Only 30% of adults in most Southeast Asian countries are financially literate. This means majority of people in the region don't understand the myriad of financial products or can't make the best financial decisions, whether it's on savings, whether it's on insurance, whether it's on investment needs. So we are committed to driving this financial inclusion by providing very clear, very transparent, how do we educate our driver partners better, for example.
You know, governments growing increasingly uncomfortable with a growing reach of big tech. I mean, they're talking about regulation. Are you concerned about that? I mean, how much regulation is too much regulation? Would regulation necessarily impinge on innovation?
I think there's a lot of discussion around big tech and regulation in the US now. But in Southeast Asia, it's so different. The US has a very mature tech ecosystem with very large tech players. S&P 500 have many of them. Southeast Asia, on the other hand, is still at the very beginning of this road. If you look at the 2019 study by Google, Temasek, and Bain, it shares that in Southeast Asia, the digital economy will continue to grow from 100 billion to 300 billion by 2025. So there's still a lot of room for different players, whether it's a small startup or established players or industry incumbents. And we just need to keep innovating for Southeast Asian consumers. What is most important is that we have this open and continuous dialogue with regulators to make sure we do what's best for consumers.
Anthony, we can't talk about future payments without talking about digital currencies, cryptocurrencies. How do you see cryptos, digital currencies fitting into the future of digital payments? Do you see them as perhaps a fintech solution to faster, cheaper, more inclusive form of payment?
I know digital currencies is a hot topic right now. From what I've observed, there's so many examples of it, the likes of crypto. And I know it's been very popular, and especially with even private and institutional investors since 2020 and growing. But a starting point is, how do we gain mass adoption for these, and whether these new technologies can be trusted? Trust is a very important word here by both consumers and regulators. And crypto was seen as a challenger to the status quo. But we haven't seen it replace day-to-day transactions yet because of the regular fluctuations that's taking place. And that undermines it as a reliable source or store of value. So with all that said, blockchain, the underlying tech, that's here to stay. And we believe that it creates transparency so that when people transact, as everyone is on a network and there's a ledger or transactions, it builds trust. So this is where the real innovation, this is where the real value could lie. So we will continue to watch these developments regularly. And I think our goal is, with the region's regulators, encourage clear education and clear transparency so that will help on mass adoption.
I'd like you to do some crystal ball gazing for us at this stage. I mean, what are you most excited about when you think about the potential of technology? What innovations do you think are coming?
I think beyond payments, we're looking at a breadth of financial services that could reach millions. And as you know, in Southeast Asia, 600 million. So millions for the very first time. Today, legacy financial services are still quite inflexible, not very transparent. So the people who have access are more sophisticated, are middle or upper class, but it really doesn't have to be that way. In the future, hopefully in the near future, financial products are transparent, are affordable, easy to read. Even a 5-year-old could understand. My 5-year-old son could read it and understand. And how consumers and small businesses will have access to this, I believe, is the future of digibanks. And that's why we are betting on this future. We see the banks of the future being totally branchless. Imagine no more branches, no more ATMs, totally ATM-less. Fintech platforms that wants to connect with these banks will not be restricted by the lack of infrastructure anymore. Whether you're in a tier 4 city or on a 17,000th island in Indonesia. And you as a consumer, as long as you have basic internet, anyone could have access to a financial service you need while sitting at home in your couch, whether it's savings, whether it's invest, whether it's insurance, whether it's taking a loan to grow your small business. It should be as easy as today how you use Grab food to buy lunch or you use Grab to go to the Bloomberg office. So I believe that's key to making it accessible and open to all.
What concerns you the most about technology? Would that be cybersecurity?
What concerns us about technology today? Today?
Mm-hmm. And the future.
Okay. Well, the issue isn't technology. It's about how we roll it out and how it's meaningful to our consumers. I think many companies are helping small businesses, and we welcome that. As many of them, many small businesses absolutely need to come online. So our job is to make sure how do they onboard, register, and get on board and start selling ASAP. But you can't just expect magic to happen. We need to provide them the tools. We need to provide them training. We need to help them with the self-service ads to grow their sales and help them understand what are the responsibilities of taking responsible lending to short-term loans to grow their business. So this is how we're going to help them grow online and digitize their business, especially small businesses, whether it's a warung in Indonesia or hawker in Singapore. Now, in the lending space, what I'm worried about is there are bad actors that freely have been making loans without the right checks and balances. And this generally leads to very bad outcomes. I mean, Bloomberg had an article, if you remember, about Cambodia and how it's really pushing the country into a bad place with 8 billion in loans. We need to ensure lending is responsible. We need to ensure when we lend to someone, that person is likely to pay back based on highly robust credit scoring. We need to prioritize to make sure we help finance people who are looking to purchase productive tools. So for example, in our case, whether it's providing a fuel lending, so fuel card lending, so that they can continue to drive and deliver more food and groceries and help people mobility needs. Whether it's better smartphones, so the GPS, we provide smartphone financing to ensure that the workhorse device has a better GPS kit set so they can deliver services better. And this creates a multiplying effects in the economy.
Anthony Tan, co-founder of Grab, we thank you for your insights today. Been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
What a great discussion. Now, our next guest made his first, $10 billion. Arena that home to the Miami Heat, all before when he'd even entered his 30s. And now he's added to the glitter surrounding his crypto firm, FTX, announcing quarterback Tom Brady and his supermodel wife, Gisele Bündchen, as investors and ambassadors. We caught up with Sam Bankman-Fried while in quarantine in Hong Kong, where he's set up his crypto exchange safely beyond the reach of restrictive US regulation. In this first What's Next digital money segment, Bloomberg executive editor Tracy Alloway talks to the FTX founder and CEO about the outlook for crypto at a time when the value of digital currencies is kind of falling. Few in the industry have better insight than Sam on whether this is the end or just the beginning of the digital money boom.
Sam, it is so lovely to see you again. You run one of the biggest, certainly one of the fastest growing crypto exchanges. Crypto does have a reputation for intense volatility. Lots of people are critical of that fact, given that some people say it is supposed to be a store of value. We've had a massive downdraft in crypto prices this week. What's going on?
Yeah, so it's certainly been volatile. And there's sort of two ways that you can reach, a lower volatile state. One is you can have something which is not a free floating currency. In crypto, that would be a stable coin, a blockchain based token that is just backed by a US dollar or some other asset, and its price is just pegged to it. But other than that, if you're going to be just a market force dependent asset, you're not going to stop being volatile unless you have sort of a mature, slowly changing marketplace. And that's certainly not true of crypto right now. It's had, wild up and down swings, although on net, a lot of price appreciation. And I think that is sort of a consequence of the fact that it's a really quickly growing asset class and a quickly changing asset class. And, you can't have that level of change and growth without having a good degree of price volatility along the way. I don't think it's going to really see a huge slowdown in volatility until the world's made up its mind on what its long-term role is really going to be. But, we saw a huge price increase over the first quarter of the year. I think a lot of this driven by the anticipation of large financial institutions getting involved in the crypto ecosystem. And it is, in fact, the case that most of the financial institutions we talk to say they are looking to probably get involved somehow in crypto. We'll see what that means exactly. They don't know. It's exploratory. But there really does seem to be incoming, an incoming wave from that. A lot of people got very long in anticipation. They lost a little bit of a race. Before that money actually came in and filled out the capital base, there's a little bit of a downtick, and that liquidated many of the long positions.
Just to step back for a second, you mentioned this idea that the world hasn't yet agreed on the use cases for crypto. What are they to you? What do you see crypto as being useful for or beneficial for?
Yeah, obviously we'll have to see what ends up really, getting legs and running. But I think in potential, people talk about sort of two use cases, the means of transfer and the store of wealth. I'm going to put aside the store of wealth. I think it very well may be a big thing. It's a pretty subjective thing in terms of what causes that to work. But I think on the means of transfer side, you can sort of fool yourself into thinking that it's easy to transfer money right now if you happen to have Venmo and be sending it to a friend who also has Venmo. But as soon as you leave that regime, it all of a sudden it's quite difficult. As soon as you leave the regime of two people with the same centralized service, just paper transferring money, when you're looking at international wire transfers, they can take days, they can take hundreds of dollars. Websites often don't even support them. You have to go physically to a branch to do them. There's a lot of messiness in the system. It takes 2 months for credit card transactions to actually settle, and for ACH transfers to actually settle. And so I do think that potentially crypto could be massively easier way to transfer value. It doesn't mean every iteration of it has been, but it certainly could be, and I think some versions of it are. And the other thing that I think has a ton of potential is when you look at smart contracts, and this is very speculative right now, but the ability to put arbitrary programs on a blockchain, I think is really cool and fascinating.
Now, FTX is based in Hong Kong. We've recently seen reports about China cracking down on various aspects of crypto trading and especially mining. How do you navigate what really seems like a bit of a landmine at the moment in terms of the regulatory or the sovereign responses to crypto?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And right now we're seeing almost every jurisdiction in the world trying to figure out what their regime is going to be in crypto. You can count on one hand the number of jurisdictions that can tell you, look, this is our regime, this is our licensing regime, here's our regulatory regime, here's how it works. In almost every place, what you'll see, it says, I don't know, here's what we're doing for now. We're trying to figure out what our kind of crypto specific legislation is going to look like. Stay tuned, and we're getting in touch with industry participants. You've certainly seen a lot of activity coming out of China. There's been a lot of crackdowns recently, although historically there have been moves in both directions, from mainland. And I think that, that sort of has depended on a lot of different sort of specific and idiosyncratic conditions. But one thing I would say is that FTX is an extremely geographically distributed exchange. No jurisdiction is more than about 10% of our revenue. And this is in contrast to most exchanges in crypto, not all of them, but most of them, which find the bulk of their activity coming from one place. We've put a lot of effort to being, as distributed and global as we can. And because of that, we have, we have users in most jurisdictions. We have offices in a number, and we're going to have to see how things play out everywhere. But there sort of isn't one jurisdiction that stands out for us in terms of its significance to the business.
Now, you've been quite open about your own interest in altruism. And meanwhile, we've seen Bitcoin come under quite a lot of criticism recently over its energy use. Elon Musk obviously has been very vocal on that topic. How do you square your interest in crypto with a desire to make the world a better place?
Totally. So the first thing I'd say is that there is significant energy usage by crypto. I think some people will try to shoo away this question. I think that is being too glib. I think it is a reasonable question to ask. I think some people are very doomy about the question, which I think is also not super reasonable. The truth is there is significant energy usage, but it is not sort of like really out of line with respect to the amount of activity going on the blockchain. If you look at ratios of energy usage to economic activity on the blockchain, it is not that different than what you see in other industries. So the first thing I would say is this is not a uniquely crypto problem, but that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. It does matter. And I do think that any way that crypto can try and become more green is really important, especially as it starts to scale more. I think there's sort of two core ways of doing this, and we've been sort of trying to help on both. One of them, sort of the first one is just doing what you can to offset the impact, whether it's through preventing deforestation, carbon removal, or other techniques. It is economically reasonable to do so, and we have pledged to do that. We've pledged to make FTX at least carbon neutral through offsets. And the second piece of this is that almost all of the energy usage goes to mining proof of work blockchains. And there's a few different sort of security protocols that a blockchain can use. Proof of work is one, proof of stake is another. The energy guzzling is unique to proof of work, which is, in terms of major cryptocurrencies, only used by Bitcoin and Ethereum today, and soon will only be used by Bitcoin because Ethereum is switching to proof of stake. And so to the extent that a lot of the on-chain activity happens in any other blockchain, their energy usage is a really small fraction of what we're seeing today. And so, that doesn't mean that proof of work has to go away, but it just means that, you're likely over time going to see a lot of the high throughput transaction, volume happening on sort of the most efficient chains.
Can you just elaborate on that last point a little bit? What is the future of Bitcoin specifically, in your view, given that we have criticism around its energy usage, given we have criticism around its volatility? We seem to have abandoned all ambitions for it to become like an actual method of payment. Given its inflexibility and its, I guess, unwillingness to adapt to a different vision of crypto that seems to be out there, what's going to happen to it?
It's a good question. I don't know for sure. I don't want to make price predictions here. None of this is financial advice. But some thoughts on it. One piece of this is that you could imagine it becoming a primary store of value without becoming a means of transfer, so to speak. A sort of thing where it plays a gold-like role, where on a long time scale, without sending that many transactions through the network, you might acquire positions or put holdings in Bitcoin. But if you actually want to send $17 to your friend, you would use a different blockchain. to send that transaction because it will be cheaper and more energy efficient and faster. And so I think that's one plausible answer here. In terms of volatility, that's going to be really a property of any cryptocurrency that has the potential for price appreciation right now. Now, again, you can have a stable coin if your goal is just to hold dollars but on a blockchain, right? And that's totally fine if that's what you're looking for. But if you are looking for an alternate asset to store wealth in an emerging industry, you can't really have that and have a chance at really significant growth without having significant volatility. That would be sort of violating the efficient market hypothesis. The last thing I'll say is that you could see, and you do see a fair bit of this growing, transfers of Bitcoin on other blockchains. And it's not really Bitcoin that's being transferred. It's a wrapper on it. It's a token which someone promises to let you swap out for a Bitcoin. But you could use that on shorter timescales to sort of move IOUs for a Bitcoin. It's almost like a stablecoin on a Bitcoin, but just running on a faster blockchain.
Okay, so crypto is all about innovation. What innovation in the space is getting you most excited at the moment?
Yeah, I think two things. The first, and this is sound a little dumb, but just making really good products. I think that is unbelievably important for the growth of the space. It gets highly underrated. People will say this is an amazing concept. It's going to kill the banks tomorrow, and that's not how the world works. That is the real answer is, in order to see, and first of all, a lot of this is going to be symbiotic with existing systems, but second of all, in order to see real massive adoption of blockchain technology and crypto assets, you're going to have to see beautiful GUIs, really wonderful customer experiences, well thought out product design. So that's just one thing. And then the other thing that I'll say is DeFi in particular, I think is really exciting and fascinating. I think it's going to be 20% of the space or something, which is a lot. But I do think that it in particular really needs to get its act together in terms of transaction costs and efficiency, in terms of product design, and in terms of the standard that applications are held to.
Who doesn't dream of beautiful GUIs? Speaking of that, actually, we've seen a lot of central banks get more interested in the digital currency space. What do you think about that development and the idea of the big incumbents of the financial system coming into a technology that was originally supposed to, cut them out from it?
They're all looking to do it. Everyone who you would think of as, wow, that player might get really disrupted by blockchain, almost every one of them has had that conversation internally. And most of them over the last year have gone from saying, hopefully it'll just die out, to saying, all right, looks like it probably won't die out. We got to start doing something here so that this is a part of our business, not disrupting our business. And you see with Netflix, and it's sort of, I think Netflix is an interesting company given how central it is to everyone's life these days, relative to how much the company itself is talked about. But Netflix disrupted itself. Like, it tried to disrupt an industry with, online DVD deliveries. And then it realized that, that wasn't actually the future. And quickly switched to actual just streaming, ended up completely killing its own business model with its new business model, but successfully did that. And I think you see a lot of fintech players who are looking to disrupt finance, realizing that they need to be taking crypto seriously and integrating with it rather than being surprised when products roll out.
All right, Sam, really appreciate your insight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Another awesome conversation there. Meanwhile, over the past year, the pandemic has devastated the economies of Latin America, but has also accelerated the region's shift towards online banking. That in Brazil, generations of savers have had to squeeze through revolving doors to access inefficient and accommodating bank branches. Now, a digital revolution is underway, and for many in Brazil, just a smartphone tap away. Nubank is at the forefront of this transition, hitting the 40 million customer mark during the pandemic. In this What's Next interview, Bloomberg Wealth reporter Felipe Marquez asks Nubank co-founder Cristina Junqueira about the bank's extraordinary momentum, who inspires her, and where consumer finance is headed next.
So, Cristina, thank you for being here today. It's nice to see you again. I want to start our conversation by asking you about revolving doors, actually. because you can go to a bank in Brazil and not see a revolving door in front of it. But I remember a couple of years ago, you and the new bank staff actually put a revolving door in a museum right next to the paintings, right next to the portraits. What was the point you were trying to make there?
Since we started Nubank and we started issuing credit cards, people were very anxious to be able to just completely cut the cords, like with the traditional banking system. But they needed more from us. They needed an account product. They needed a debit card. Not everyone could be approved for the credit card product. So there was a moment in which we were ready to give people that. And the way that we thought about this was what was standing in the way of people cutting the cords and becoming our customers fully was now gone. And when we thought about things that stood in the way, the revolving doors were the perfect metaphor. So the way that we communicated that to our customers was by grabbing one of those revolving doors and landing them as an exhibition in one of the nicest museums in São Paulo, Brazil. So it was really a nice way to draw attention to the fact that there was nothing else standing in their way, that they could finally cut the cord from the past and really take the next step in terms of making their lives so much easier.
You're actually doing a pretty good job in stealing customers from those banks with the revolving doors. I mean, you've hit the 40 million customer mark during the pandemic. What do you make of that success?
It's been so interesting because when we first started, I used to tell David, my partner, that we would have to spend a lot of money marketing to convince people to even care. Because banks aren't loved anywhere, but they're especially hated in Brazil. People have such horrible experiences. Nobody wakes up like excited, in the morning saying, "Oh, today I'm getting a bank account or I'm getting a credit card." Like, it's not like a new phone or a car. Like, people just hate even thinking about it. So ever since we started, we've been constantly surprised by the amount of traction, by the amount of just will and how ready consumers were for something like Nubank to come along. And what we saw just over the past couple of years was even more stunning. We, as you mentioned, we've hit the 40 million customer mark. Like, we've more than doubled over the last year or so. Of course, the pandemic helped that because, it was already bad enough for you to stand in a line in a bank branch or waste like 2 to 3 or 4 hours of your day whenever you needed to take care of something. During the pandemic, like that was even more so because people didn't want to expose themselves to that.
And once the pandemic is gone, do you think they're going to stay with you?
Well, that's what we've seen so far. We have very little churn, not to say zero, because there's no point. Like, we're not charging people any fees. We're offering them a consistently better customer experience. So we do not see any churn at all. Like, we continue to see even higher and higher levels of activation of these new accounts that we've gained through the pandemics.
And why do you think banks got it so wrong? I mean, you said they were more hated in Brazil than anywhere else in the world, but they are hated anywhere else in the world. So basically, why has it come to that?
I think it's been very cozy for them over the past few decades, right? Like, it's a sector that is 30% of the GDP of the region, very high margins. It's ROEs that you don't see elsewhere, like north of 20%. And customers didn't have an alternative. Like, if you felt that you weren't being served well by one of the banks, like, where would you go? To the other one that was just like them? Like, there wasn't really something that consumers could do. So it was very normal. This because you're Brazilian. Like, it was very normal to see these rankings of complaints of the most complained companies in the world, in the country, and they were all banks. Like, consistently for decades, like, those are the companies that people complained the most about. And they were also paying some of the highest fees in the world and the highest interest rates in the world. So it was just really a bad experience that was, continuing going in a very expensive one because of lack of competition. It was an oligopoly until we finally came along.
But you actually made a point of this being one of the more regulated industries in the world, and banks have a lot of power. As you said, they are 30% of GDP in the region. How are they fighting back? And are you worried that regulators are going to come and help banks in any way, or regulation is going to change, and then firms like Nubank are going to have a tougher time? Is that something that concerns you going forward?
Well, when we first started, we were very concerned. Being in a regulated sector means, things can change, and they will, right? Because technology brings new applications, and even society evolves in a way that requires regulators to adapt regulation to whatever context is here now. So that was part of the game. But what we didn't know was that regulators were just very excited about bringing finally some competition into this market. Like they were also fed up of consumers being treated the way they were. So what we found was that the central bank in Brazil, they were very keen on having challengers coming in and offering better experience to consumers. So sure, there's regulatory risk always. Like there's always things that can change. But what we've seen over the course of 8 years since we started Nubank was that these changes always happen in the direction of making customers' lives better, of making easier to compete within this sector, made it more simple to offer alternatives to customers. So we can say in the right direction, so to speak. So it's not really something that we're super concerned. That's not to say that banks haven't used their power to try and stop us in many ways. Like they have. It's like that Gandhi quote. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. They're certainly fighting.
Chris, you've actually managed to build a business that in the span of 8 years is now worth $30 billion. What's next? I mean, if you look at financial technology, what's the next big innovation that needs to come?
Customers have been asking us to do all sorts of things. Like customers wanted us to start airline companies, to start, utility companies. Everywhere where they see a bad experience, they want us to come in and fix that for them. And we're happy to do so. Right now, like one of the latest things that we've launched was insurance, and that's a whole industry ready for disruption. We've launched one product yet, and there's certainly more to come that we can do to remove a lot of complexity out of that industry, for instance. Another one that you cover as well is on the asset management side. We recently bought the largest digital investment broker in Brazil, Isinvest, and we're integrating that into our offer. And there's so much potential for us to offer investment products that were only like reserved for the wealthiest, richest, like private banking type of offering, to 40 million customers or more in Brazil, to really democratize access to much better investment products that can have a very significant impact in society here.
And what about crypto, Chris? I mean, is it something you guys are interested in? Do you own Bitcoin personally? What's your view on the matter?
I do own some Bitcoin. It's such an interesting technology, such a technology that has a lot of potential to be very transformative. As far as the assets go, we know that customers are so interested. There's a lot of demand all over the world for the asset class. So we're for sure looking into ways that we can serve that demand and make sure that our customers are having access to the best options out there if they want to have exposure to that asset class.
Chris, you're one of the handful of female founders at giant startups, at unicorns. Who are your inspirations? I mean, who do you think are the really creative thinkers in finance that you model yourself after?
Well, I gotta say there ain't many inspirations within finance. I look elsewhere. One of my main inspirations has always been Walt Disney, just everything that the Walt Disney Company does. I've been a big fan of their work, and there's a lot that we borrowed from them in terms of trying to make our customer experience as magical as it possibly can be, to draw from the way that they think about customer service and the way that they think about their customers or guests. So there's a lot that we borrow from that for sure. Other than that, there's a lot that we borrowed from Amazon. Like they're so customer obsessed. That's something that we've been thinking about a lot since we started, like this day one mindset as well, just making sure that we're always hungry, that you're not resting on our laurels. That's something that is very present to us, very dear to us.
What do you say is the financial landscape going to look like, let's say, a decade or 5 years or 5 years from now? I mean, who do you think is going to end up surviving?
I think a lot of the traditional banking system is going to have a hard time surviving. Maybe they're going to become infrastructure, like utilities, the pipes like behind other companies are going to offer better experiences. They're going to design actually innovative products that people want, which is something that they've been failing at for decades. But a few of them, maybe like given how much access to capital they have, like how big they already are, like if they work really hard, they might be able to stick around. We'll see. What we know is that customers, now that they finally have alternatives, like they're not going to go back to settling for a bad experience.
You mentioned that you don't see regulation as a big threat, but when you become big, doesn't it become a larger threat? I mean, do you think you can be slapped with the kind of regulations regulators have for big banks?
We, to some degree, already are, right? Like there's so many specific regulations that we already have to comply 100% with. If you think about money laundering prevention, if you think about cybersecurity, like there's so many angles of regulation that we already have the same burdens, the same hurdles as the big banks. So, I mean, regulators are smart and they're designing regulation in a proportional way for a reason. So I think as we grow, we're even less exposed to some degree to some of those fluctuations, because when you have one product, if there's one regulatory change in that product, is 100% of what you have. Like nowadays, in the case of Nubank, since we have credit cards, we have debit cards, we have an account product, we have personal loans, insurance, investments. It's hard to imagine a world in which there would be so many negative regulatory changes in all those different verticals that would impact us negatively, right?
Chris, just to wrap things up, because I've crossed the time a little bit, but what's your ultimate dream of Nubank? I mean, how would you say this is it, we're being successful? What do you see what would be like your dream for Nubank?
What I can say is that Latin America has so many people that are underbanked or even unbanked. You know, they have never had access to any type of financial services solution. And there is a dignity to having access that allows you to save money, that allows you to have access to credit, to become an entrepreneur, to be educated in a lot of ways, and to accomplish more in life. There's also the high amount of fees and the very high interest rates that people are paying all over those countries. And that's money that we've been saving customers in Brazil. We've saved people in Brazil over 20 billion reais in fees, that like in Brazil alone over the past few years. And that's money that could go into healthcare, into food, into education, into a lot of other things. So we do have big dreams in terms of being able to free many more people, like tens of millions or maybe hundreds of millions of people from all that complexity and all that financial burden, and to allow them to be the better version of themselves, like the optimal version of themselves, when they have access and they have back control of their life and they have their dignity back.
Chris, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Let's stick with the theme of emerging markets, because COVID-19, for institutional investors at least, led to historic portfolio outflows from emerging and frontier markets. Now, pushing in the other direction is Kenya-based Aza, which facilitates low-cost digital currency trading solutions using blockchain as an underlying technology. Of course, crypto, which we associate with blockchain, is very much part of Aza's blockchain-based solution too. And before I get to my next catalyst, the founder of Aza, I want to ask the audience the following question. So get involved, please, and get your thoughts on crypto. Now, what does the future hold for cryptocurrencies? It's all a speculative bubble. Or cryptocurrencies may be a bubble, but the blockchain technology, it's a game changer. Crypto threatens sovereign currencies. Or watch out for regulatory backlash. Crypto's use in cross-border transactions makes it indispensable for emerging economies. So there's your few options there that you have. And so it's all a speculative bubble. Cryptocurrencies may be a bubble, but the blockchain tech is a game changer. Crypto threatens sovereign currencies, or crypto's use in cross-border transactions makes it indispensable. So remember, if you're logged into the platform, you can submit your answer to the poll listed on the right side of your screen. That's where you can also send your questions for our next guest. Get involved, because I'm going to be doing my best to read as many as we do have time on air. Let's introduce our guest for What's Next segment. Joining us now is Elizabeth Rossiello, CEO and founder of Aza Finance, which has become a market maker for major African currencies. Elizabeth, welcome. Congratulations on being named a 2021 Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me here.
Elizabeth, we were just hearing very passionately the viewpoint of what's happening in Latin America, the unbanked, the need to serve, and the respect and viewpoint it gives people when they are able to access money and partake in the economy. You really focus on small, medium-sized enterprises. First and foremost, before we dig into the world of crypto, which I know you have a long history with, talk to us about what currently Aza is providing across the continent of Africa.
Sure. Well, we're the largest non-bank broker for foreign exchange and treasury solutions. We work with businesses all across the continent and all across the world that looking to do business on the continent. We provide foreign exchange, settlement, treasury, and all kinds of corporate payment solutions. When you think about fintechs that are working in payments, we usually think about retail when we think about Africa. But all of those fintechs, all of those financial institutions, which have been booming and growing across the continent for the last decade, also need services. And that's where we step in. We provide the back end and all of the financial payments from the top to the bottom of the vertical for the corporates, the fintechs, and the banks themselves.
Booming, growing, certainly something we associate with companies across the emerging markets. But has it been booming and growing? How's the world of fintech, in particular, your world, how has Asa Finance managed to weather what has been an extraordinary 2020 and into 2021? Do you feel that in some way, was it an odd help or was it a hindrance?
Well, I've just written about this, and I think it's a huge help for companies that were on the outside or, alternative, and especially on the African continent. We have heavy incumbents in a lot of the financial sector, and I think they were really having a stronghold, whether it was through licensing or brokerages or regulatory relationships on the financial sector, almost kind of co-opting the sector. And in certain markets like Francophone West Africa, we saw no non-bank financial institutions arise in the last 15 years. And that's pretty incredible if you think about the fact that East Africa and Southern Africa had all of the mobile money booms first in the world, when Francophone Africa had not a single non-bank financial institution allowed to enter the market. And then came COVID. And I think a lot of the traditional banking, or what we call TradFi, traditional banking systems and banks were offline. They didn't have a work from home policy. Commuting in Lagos takes up to 3 hours a day each direction. So all of those employees were spending so much time in the car, getting into work. None of them really stayed at home. They might not have had power or consistent internet where they lived. So we really just saw a complete halt in service from the traditional financial sector, at least in the first few months of the lockdown. And clients came running to the fintechs. And of course, as we know, fintechs have been booming across the continent. We had 0 unicorns just 2 years ago. We now have 6 on the continent, 2 alone in just Q1 2021. So it shows that, in a terrible year for many other things, it was a great year for fintech on the continent.
And you've therefore been doubling down, looking to expand. M&A seems to be the way to go. What are you looking to build? Is it about purchasing other companies that do what you do in other parts of Africa? What do you think that the continent really needs?
Well, we've been at this for 8 years, and we have a big picture in mind, which is to really provide this layer of service, this platform, like a thin and wide layer across the entire continent for Pan-African service. And what you don't see is a lot of companies going beyond their home market. So you do see a lot of fintechs being really great in their first market. Nigeria is a great example. It's a big, beautiful, tempting jewel, as we call it, and it calls in all your resources, your engineering product to invest in just one market. It's hard to find the time and capacity to diversify. However, we were diversifying from the get-go. That's always been our business model. So we're really lucky and I guess strategic in the way that we always look to enter new markets. So even in year 2, we entered our first new market. By year 3, we were in 4 markets. And year 4, we were licensed not just in East Africa, but also the UK and in West Africa. And we've built from there. When we're looking to acquire a company, we're looking at these hometown winners that might have a great relationship with a local banking partner, with a local regulator, but can't seem to grow outside their home market. And maybe they're not able to scale. It's very hard to attract financing on the African continent for a lot of founders, whether it's just exposure to investors or telling the story or showing that their home market has the high market capture potential that a lot of the venture capitalists look for. When you're starting a company in Ivory Coast or in Ghana, you don't have the same market that you would in maybe the Philippines or in North America. And that's hard for a lot of global investors to swallow. So we really look at the continent as one. And to be able to do that, we need to find, build, buy, rent the infrastructure in every single market that we operate. And so far we've been building and renting, and now it's time to buy. So we've just done our second acquisition and we're looking to go from there.
Talking of infrastructure, of course, we introduced you by talking about the underlying technology that helps you, do these payments, settle payments, and offer this FX trading. And in large part, it's underlying blockchain. And I've got the results of the poll now, so I just want to bring it up for our audience because they're ready to share. And 4%, only 4% out there actually think that cryptocurrencies are a speculative bubble. So that's one to note. But 53%, so the bulk of you out there think cryptocurrencies may be a bubble, but the blockchain tech is a game changer. 17% think it actually threatens sovereign currencies. So interesting, of course, the Fed and many central bankers coming out and looking at stable coins, but also looking at the underlying regulation. Meanwhile, 26%, so a quarter of you think crypto's use in cross-border transactions makes it indispensable for emerging economies. So talk to us, Elizabeth, about how it's driving your business. Is blockchain indispensable when you're looking at currency flows in emerging markets? And what about crypto in and of itself?
So first of all, I always like to say, I think, those who are passionate on crypto are passionate on blockchain, but hate the other. It's misguided marketing, to be honest. I think it's one and the same. It's digital currencies. It's digital finance in a lot of ways. It's the future of digital finance. And I think it's here to stay in whatever form. And I think, there's a lot of hate put on cryptocurrencies for this idea that it's speculation. But I mean, we're sitting here at Bloomberg, which is, trading markets who are focused on speculation and market dynamics all over the world. And that's just how markets work. So speculation is not a dirty word. Abuse of customers is a dirty word. Other things are dirty words, but that's not really what this is about. This is about access. So when we first started the company, it was very hard to become a counterparty to trade foreign exchange. It was very hard to accept customer payments and pay out if you didn't have bank accounts all over the world. So for when we first started the company, we used Bitcoin, so not just blockchain, we actually used Bitcoin to trade with counterparties. And then we tracked it all on the Bitcoin blockchain. So we used it for two things, actually a use of a means of exchange, a way of accepting and paying out payments, and also a record. And we didn't have the money to buy SAP or to invest in very heavy infrastructure or, open source. And open source software for us was the easiest thing to do. So it was very free, it was accessible, it was robust, and it was immediately available to other startups around the world who are also using it. So I had instant counterparties in Canada, in Singapore, in China, even in South Africa with Luno at the time. So I think for us, it was the way to enter. And I think it's a stepping stone and it's bringing a lot of people into this space. Now, from there on, we've built our own infrastructure. So I am my own counterparty in a lot of markets because I both have the ability to pay in and pay out, to make a market, to collect, in both Ghana and South Africa, in the UK and Nigeria, in Kenya and in Senegal. So in those places, I don't really need to use any other means of exchange, be it a cryptocurrency, a digital currency, or fiat. I use my own balance sheet. So at this point in the game, we do about less than 10% goes through digital currencies, and we really consider them like any other currency. So my cry is really normalize digital currencies. It's no longer a blockchain company, it's just a company. And it's no longer digital finance, it's just finance. I mean, any financial institution out there that's not investing in digital finance is soon to be the way of Blockbuster video. I mean, we really have to think about this is just the future. It's the here to stay.
I love the way you push us forward. Think about the next iteration and how you're continuing to evolve. And yeah, all the naysayers out there, it's clearly words of wisdom coming from you, Elizabeth. Such a joy to have you with us. Of course, Elizabeth
Thanks so
is
much.
leading Adza Finance across Africa. Thank you for joining us today. Now we go from blockchain's use in Africa to its application in Latin America. Up next, our catalyst, Simon Chamorro. He's CEO and co-founder of Value, looks to build a crypto-based economy in Venezuela.
I'm Simon Chamorro. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Value, and we're a product that helps Venezuelans living in hyperinflation protect their money from losing value, receive remittances, and pay locally to buy food and medicines. Both businesses and consumers are able to exchange goods and services with each other, paying in cryptocurrency. The vision for us is to increase economic freedom.
Venezuela is known for its political and economic instability. Hyperinflation has caused the bolivar to lose 99.9% of its value in just 2 years. Wealthy Venezuelan families saw their fortunes disappear, and the poor were pushed even further into desperation. Simon Chamorro knows this story all too well.
Growing up in Venezuela, essentially whatever my dad and my mom were able to build during their life was lost. When the economy started to fail, we, for example, had water shortages or like electricity blackouts across the country. Money was starting to get hyperinflated. This is not like a sad story that I'm trying to tell. This is the reality of most Venezuelans. More than 99% of the Venezuelans lost everything they've built because the country failed. All of the Venezuelans' savings of most middle-class people went to zero. And I knew I wanted to build something. I had to find my purpose. I always knew I wanted to start a company and to build things, which is the reason why I studied industrial design with the hypothesis that I was going to be able to build things. I didn't pursue that career, but I learned a lot of things that got me into tech. So I found crypto through tech. I felt passionate about the technology, and then when I understood the potential of crypto, I realized that Venezuela is potentially the best place to do this at a massive scale. The reality is, if we deconstruct cryptocurrencies, the most basic thing is that it helps disintermediate, and this may have the possibility to change society as we know it. The main problem Venezuelans are going through right now is hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is just a byproduct of total mismanagement of the country.
Venezuela's descent into an impoverished dictatorship put the devastating effects of hyperinflation on full display for the world to see. Lines for basic needs, extreme shortages of food and medical supplies, civil strife, violence. And the citizens spared were the ones who could move their currency out of Venezuela to other more stable currencies like the US dollar, a luxury mostly saved for the ultra-elite. But Simon's platform Value promises the opportunity for everyday Venezuelans to protect themselves from hyperinflation by way of cryptocurrency. And according to him, the unstable conditions of his country are the perfect breeding ground for such an experiment.
Nobody trusts the currency or the government. People are looking for solutions. In a place where people are trying to survive, the barrier of trying new things is much lower. So digital dollars, stablecoins, cryptocurrencies, people are going to be willing to try it with a little bit of money and then slowly kind of get there. Our main objective right now as a company is to enable merchants to accept digital dollars as a medium of payment, and so people have to use the Bolivar less and less. We're focused on building a product that serves from the richest person with a lot of education and technical literacy, from the lowest income person with very low education and low technical literacy. In a country like Venezuela, where the minimum wage is $1, you have a situation where most people are starting their own little business, selling hot dogs or selling the local food called arepas or whatever they do, but they sell it to their community. And you have these hyper-local communities, so we want to help them accept payments in dollars, in digital dollars, stablecoins, and then onboard users. The more consumers that pay in dollars, the better for the merchants. The more merchants that accept it, the better for the consumer. So far, we've moved millions of dollars. We've helped more about than 150,000 households, 30,000 monthly active users, and it's working. The reality is that economic freedom, it's only directly tackled by the innovation that is cryptocurrencies.
But we can't forget that Venezuela has tried this already. El Petro was a proposed cryptocurrency backed by the country's most abundant resource, oil. While El Petro was widely considered a resounding failure, many experts agree that the experiment was a necessary step in establishing cryptocurrency for the future. And Simon is convinced that its foundations, namely blockchain technology, remain stronger than ever and ready for another, more practical iteration.
Blockchain is really a paradigm shift for the human race. It's one of the most important things that has happened in recent history. What you're starting to see is companies starting to completely build their products on top of this blockchain. It's almost like it's creating its own economy. If there's a way to provide more stability and economic freedom and financial freedom to Venezuelans without crypto, I would rather for that to happen than for me to be successful with a product that doesn't bring value to the people.
Now we turn from cryptocurrencies, which are changing the world of money, to biotech, which is revolutionizing the world of medicine. This year has been a breakthrough for biotech. Technologies that were decades in the making found multiple applications during the pandemic. The most dramatic example, of course, being the mRNA vaccines that we see ending the pandemic in the US and much of Europe. But science doesn't solve all of our problems, of course. Much of the emerging world is grappling with supply chain problems, weak or non-existent public healthcare systems, limited access to those very vaccines that we talk of that have been hogged by the rich world. In this What Matters conversation, Eurasia Group Managing Director of Global Strategy, that's Alex Kazan, asks our catalyst, Aurelia Wynn, Managing Director of the Office of the COVAX Facility at Gavi, about how we can better prepare the emerging world for the next pandemic. Aurelia, thank you so much for being here, and congratulations on being named a Bloomberg Catalyst.
Thank you, Alex. Lovely to meet you. Thanks for having me.
So why don't we start by having you talk a little bit about your work? What is Gavi? What is the COVAX facility? And what role is it playing in helping bring the world out of this pandemic?
So if you think about the very beginning of the pandemic, it was clear that we didn't just need vaccines, we needed vaccinations, and we needed billions of them. And that meant that we had to find a way not to repeat what had happened in the last pandemic, where you had a small number of countries that basically bought up the entire global supply of what was then the swine flu vaccines and left essentially none for the rest of the world. And so that was really what COVAX was created for. It was created to solve this problem. And we created a partnership with Gavi, my organization, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, CEPI, the World Health Organization, and UNICEF. And we built this coalition of partners to support 193 economies, which together represent about 90% of the global population, really to ensure that people in all countries would have fair and equitable access to vaccines. And so this is really what COVAX is trying to do, and particularly for the most vulnerable, thinking about how they can be protected so that the billions of people who don't have the ability to pay for COVID-19 vaccines can have access to them. So particularly, we created what's called an advanced market commitment, an AMC. And so for the poorest countries, the 92 poorest countries, they can have access to vaccines with the help of donor funding.
So you talked about lessons from previous pandemics, but what do you think are the 2 or 3 biggest lessons from this pandemic? And why wasn't the world more prepared going into this pandemic?
I think the first lesson is really around how we can think about making sure that we have pandemic preparedness sort of more widely. Maybe I think the second lesson would be around the fact that timing is everything during a pandemic. So it's not just about having the vaccines, it's about getting the vaccines on time. And we really are in a race against time, particularly when you think about the fact that we are very lucky to have safe and effective vaccines, but we have variants emerging. And so if we're not protecting enough people quickly enough, we get into potentially a cycle where the pandemic drags on. And then maybe lastly, I would say the third big lesson is around what we've learned about fostering global collaboration in a really unprecedented crisis. The pandemic has shown that even though the world was not prepared, we had a lot of the pieces in place in order to respond quickly, amazing scientific collaboration, being able to take vaccines through to development very, very quickly. But being able to have a global infrastructure so that we can have the manufacturing capacity in place, that we can have, thanks to COVAX, a way to remove the financial barriers to accessing vaccines. All of those items really needed to come into place and build on the strength of the existing organizations to make it come together.
So when I think about how historians are likely to write this chapter of history, I think 2 big stories, that stand out for me at least. One, of course, is the remarkable pace of innovation that you just referenced. The fact that so rapidly, using novel technology, vaccines were created in record time. But the second is really the remarkably
equal access to that innovation. So the question is, looking forward, when you think about future pandemic preparedness, but even more broadly, how do we continue to foster and encourage that kind of innovation in biomedical science and science broadly speaking, but also make sure that we have much more equal access around the world to innovations coming in health?
I think with around 300,000 new cases a day, this pandemic is far from over, and we still have a huge disparity in access to COVID-19 vaccines, particularly in the lower income economies, and still a fair way to go. So I think the fact that we have vaccines available is indeed a testament, I think, to the level of innovation, particularly with the novel technologies like the mRNA vaccines. But I think also innovation comes in terms of how we think about the multilateral response. And perhaps the other aspect in terms of innovation is how we make them available at scale. And I think this is where here aspects like technology transfer come into play, where one way is around increasing the manufacture capacity of existing manufacturers. The other way is to try to have more manufacturers be able to produce and I think have more resilience with a wider geographic base. So as we think about the different aspects, making sure that we can think around the distribution of innovation, and here particularly in the context of manufacturing and geographic diversity is important as well.
Yeah, so following up on that, when you look at the sum total of all of the resources that COVAX and the ACT Accelerator asked for, it was pretty modest, right? I mean, it pales in comparison to the size of domestic economic and other stimulus that a lot of the wealthier countries in the world directed at this pandemic. How do you address that imbalance? Why weren't more resources spent? And would you consider this either a failure of multilateralism or a partial success that gives us lessons for how to do this better going forward?
I think many simply underestimated, I think, the impact this pandemic could have, not just on people's lives and on livelihoods, but as we've all seen it, on our way of lives, on business, commerce, and trade. And so I think that's something to bear in mind. And I think as governments were looking to their response, I think it was quite a natural reaction for leaders and governments to protect their citizens first. And in fact, it is their duty to do so. But I think the world is also waking up to the fact that with an infectious disease, protecting your people means you have to think globally. And I think we're starting to see that play out. We've had unprecedented financial support for our COVAX AMC by donors. As we reflect forward, I think it's about thinking how we can build on this realization and this wake-up call. We've seen G7 leaders come forward with a commitment to share more than 800 million additional doses. And so I think the donated doses, I think, will be an important part of it. But really, for us, the reflection is around making sure that COVAX fosters a new way of global collaboration and builds on these lessons so that we can have a more systematic multilateral approach.
So one phrase that I always hear when I listen to policymakers around the world talk is this idea of a return to normal. That's the goal, right? Getting back to normal. But in the area of global public health and the work you do, what should we not return to? In other words, what changes brought about by this pandemic do you think should be permanent when we think about medicine and health and public health around the world?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but I think from my side, I think it's still far from clear what the new normal is going to be. I mean, I think there's a chance that we will end up in a situation where COVID-19 becomes endemic. If that happens, then we may need regular COVID-19 vaccines, a little bit like we do for flu. So whatever post-COVID landscape looks like, I think we need to think about preparing for the next pandemic, which, as I mentioned before, I think is pretty much a certainty. It's a matter of when it will happen, not if. And so I think if we want to avoid repeating another global crisis on the scale that we've just lived, we really need to think about this question on how do we get vaccines to all the corners in the world and very, very quickly. And we learn from some of the mistakes around, export bans and vaccine hoarding.
So we've talked a lot about what didn't happen, but with the goal of ending on a hopeful note here, what good news do you see coming out of the pandemic, particularly for developing countries? Do you see, this as a catalyst for spurring more innovation around the world, changing how we think about public health?
My hope is that by having shown a light on the people in lower income economies, this really terrible crisis that we are all living through will help the world to start to recognize the fact that we just live in a very, very interconnected world. And it's very important for everyone to have equitable access to health services. And of course, it's not just because everyone has a right to a healthy future, which they do, but also what this pandemic has shown is that infectious diseases put everyone in the same boat. And so I guess my hope is that if this can lead to a positive shift in attitude and in support from governments, from the private sector, from the public, in terms of what ongoing global health problems the world face today, particularly poorer countries, I think that would be helpful.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for the critical work that you and Gavi are doing.
Thank you very much, Alex.
Now, the newest breakthrough in vaccine technology is messenger RNA, which turns human bodies into medicine-making factories. mRNA fights COVID by training cells to manufacture virus-like proteins that then trigger an immune response. Now, the same technology could potentially be used to fight HIV, influenza, even cancer. Our next discussion is a What's Next catalyst. Joining me, who studied in the lab of the CRISPR gene editing pioneering Jennifer Doudna, of course, Nobel Prize winner. She's now teamed up with Doudna on a new venture to study the cancer-fighting potential of mRNA and other applications. I want to welcome Rachel Howitz, President and CEO of Caribou's Biosciences, and I want to invite our audience watching on the platform to please send me any questions you have for Rachel by submitting them through the Q&A box on the right side of your screen, and I'll ask as many as we have time for. But Rachel, welcome. And as we digest every day, it feels like a new breakthrough, a new excitement surrounding CRISPR as it's known. Can you just remind us exactly top level what CRISPR is?
Absolutely. Thank you, Caroline. CRISPR is a genome editing technology. It's the ability to go inside of cells and precisely change DNA sequences. I think of it as being like the Microsoft Word for the genome. Of course, it's not quite as sophisticated as Microsoft Word. Fundamentally, we're deleting genes or inserting new genes, and it's an incredibly promising new technology.
Incredibly promising. We just got a realization that over the weekend. I mean, the fact that I think it's the company, of course, Intellia, showed that it's working. In their first few case studies, we're really starting to see the phase 1 trials bearing fruit. I know that you're linked to Intellia, you're a co-founder, but have not worked with that business for a while, but cheering from the sidelines, what did you see in that data set, for example, that got you super excited?
Yeah, it's incredibly exciting what they have done. So they're hoping to develop a treatment for amyloidosis. It's a disease where basically mutated or misshapen proteins accumulate and damage various organs. And what they were able to do was actually deliver CRISPR proteins into patients. They went to the liver and they actually got rid of that mutated gene. And after a few weeks, it shows that the levels of those mutated proteins are dramatically reduced. Obviously, this is incredibly early, but it's very exciting to think that CRISPR could be used to treat and possibly someday even cure genetic diseases.
Talk to us about the breadth of application here, because that's extraordinary that someone with this liver issue can live a normal life again. What illnesses are we thinking? What applications are you excited to see CRISPR really take on?
The application space is incredibly vast. Really, any organism has DNA, and you could envision using CRISPR to edit it for a variety of reasons. There's incredibly exciting research going on today to edit the genomes of plants to try to make them more tolerant to climate change. There's exciting work going on modifying the genomes of livestock animal to make them more resistant to disease. And of course, there's incredibly exciting work happening at a number of companies, including Caribou, to use the power of CRISPR to try to treat and fight a variety of diseases, including various genetic diseases as well as various kinds of cancer.
Do you ever come across any concerns, backlash? A lot of this gene editing immediately makes, I'm sure a few people cautious. How do you overcome that caution, Rachel?
Oh, it's such an important question. Obviously, this technology brings with it very important ethical questions and ethical implications. A question I often get from friends is, well, can't you just now make designer babies? So I think our company has taken a very clear stance. We have a policy that we will not edit human embryos for any purpose. That was a really easy answer for us to come to.
Caribou, of course, came out of the work that you did with prize-winning scientists that came up with CRISPR. Of course, it's been really paid attention to all over the world. What was it like working with Jennifer?
I feel incredibly lucky that I got to do my PhD thesis work in Jennifer Doudna's lab. In fact, I was the first graduate student in her lab to work on CRISPR. I joined in what I feel like was the dark ages of the technology. In fact, at the time, there were, I think, maybe 3 scientific publications that had been published showing some sort of data on CRISPR, hinting that it might be a bacterial immune system that had some very interesting properties. So it took me about 45 minutes in my first day in the lab to read all of the papers in the field, get up to speed. And I've been working on it ever since. Obviously, very exciting to see incredibly basic research that started with questions about how bacteria fight off viruses, ultimately leading to one of the most incredible new technologies in our field in quite some time.
Do you think the world understands what you see it as the most incredible scientific breakthrough of our time? Do you think how do you envision the world 5-10 years from now? Can you give us a sort of timescale of when I might really feel the effects of the technology that you've been working on so hard, when there was but 45 minutes of research when you first arrived?
Yeah, all of this takes quite a tremendous amount of time, right? If we think about the potential to use CRISPR for some of these therapeutic applications, of course, there's years worth of basic research in the laboratory that needs to be done first, and then ultimately a series of clinical trials to evaluate safety and ultimately the potential efficacy of these new therapies. So there's a lot of exciting early work ongoing, but it takes quite a bit of time to ultimately determine whether any of these applications will be safe and ultimately effective. So I think it'll be quite some time as we see all of these opportunities start to mature.
Quite some time being decades, less than a decade?
I think on average, it takes about a decade to develop a new drug. So I hope that gives a sense for what these timelines might look like.
But do you think the year that we've just lived in, the fast forwarding of medical advances, what we've seen with Pfizer, Moderna, J&J, the vaccines, AstraZeneca, has that speeded things up at all? Or do you think that was just so out of the norm and actually we need to return to a slower process?
I think there are many things that were quite unique and special about the experience that we have just lived through and are continuing to live through. I think we also learned a lot about the power and potential of some of these new technologies. As you highlighted in your introduction, obviously this past year demonstrated the power of messenger RNA as a therapeutic or vaccine approach. And that will inform a lot of new opportunities for new drug or vaccine development going forward. I think maybe the world also began to appreciate a little bit more how drugs or how vaccines are made, and how complex some of the manufacturing can be, and how important that is in terms of actually being able to deliver these kinds of medicines or vaccines to populations around the world.
And how important it is to finance that. Intelia, I mean, just as someone who sits here working at Bloomberg on television, talking about the share price reaction, for example, Rachel, you're someone who's leading a business at Caribou. Have you found that people are desiring to put money to work here, wanting to see this sort of industry grow, whether it be public money or private money?
I mean, certainly, I think Intelia in the past few days has demonstrated the ability to continue to raise significant capital to advance their opportunities. And I think that's a great example.
Can you return a little bit to the breadth of applications here, Rachel? Because what was so interesting about Caribou's journey is that you were really looking at agricultural applications to medical applications, and then you sort of fine-tuned it to really go into the focus on humans. But where might we see the pace of change speeding up when it comes to agricultural applications too?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's obviously tremendous opportunity as we think about the pressure of climate change on crops, on agricultural livestock. And I think there's a really exciting opportunity to connect the dots between those challenges and the chance to use a technology like CRISPR to actually make these organisms, these plants, these animals more robust in light of climate change or the challenge of disease. So there's a lot of early work ongoing, and I think it's exciting to watch. Again, I'm a cheerleader from the sidelines on this work, and it's exciting to think about really being able to address some of these challenges at a large scale through genetic approaches.
What's so exciting about the conversation we're having is that we've got a global audience listening in right now. And we've got a question coming from Anhol Chahonchen, who's CEO of Pizza Hut Vietnam, asking, what will make this technology accessible at scale to more people? We're talking emerging market application here as frontier economies who we painfully now see behind in terms of the race of getting the vaccines to those people as wealthier nations such as the US and the UK hog it, basically. Rachel, do you think that CRISPR can in some way be a more equitable way of bringing healthcare to the world?
It's an amazing question. What I'll point to is that CRISPR has really taken over research laboratories around the world. It's a technology that can not only be used to try to fight diseases, but to also carry out really important basic research. And it's something that is now in probably nearly every biology lab around the globe. It is a far more accessible technology than some previous genetic technologies, and I think is really changing the face of research globally. And I think that's an incredibly important component of how we think about this long term.
We'll go away and think about it and look to the long term and the exciting work that you're currently doing in the near term. Rachel, we want to thank you so much. Rachel Howitz, of course, congratulations on being named one of our 2021 Bloomberg New Economy Catalysts. Keep on bringing us the amazing work. We thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Let's shift gears. And even though, well, Africans make up 17% of the world's population, a mere fraction, less than 2% by some estimates, of all sequenced genomes are actually African. Now, that leads to suboptimal treatment of diseases in people of African descent. Our What's Next interview coming up is with Dr. Abasi Enomobong, founder, CEO of genomics company 54Gene. The work that he's been doing to build a Pan-African biobank will benefit the whole world. And that's because the African continent's genetic diversity could help find rare causes of common diseases. Now, Bloomberg reporter Naomi Kresge spoke with Dr. Eneobong. Take a listen.
So, Basti, I wondered if we could start with just a question about the founding of your company. What pushed you to found 54Gene, and what problem were you trying to solve?
Hi, Naomi. We started 54Gene in 2019, and to solve a few problems. One was a global problem in this precision medicine space, where genomic studies that have occurred prior to now have started yielding fruit. And we have now all learned that in order to really make sense of our collective histories as humans and to understand human biology, that we need more diverse populations. So in 2018, there was a study that came out that showed that African populations only made up 2% of global GWAS studies. So these are genome-wide association studies used to find associations of genes that link genes to diseases. But even though they made up about 2%, they were responsible for about 7% of the associations found in such studies, which kind of talks about the discovery power within African genomics to help us understand ourselves as humans and to help us understand the causes of diseases, as well as potentially clues around how to cure diseases, not just for African populations, but the general population.
So what kind of you're trying to collect more genetic information for these databases, right? How can you persuade people to participate in this project?
The major, problem facing doing human genomics work in Africa was one of a lack of infrastructure, and the need for additional capacity building. Now, for us, we wanted to do this in a way that was sustainable, in the sense that it was benefiting the global population, but also, and more importantly, benefiting the African communities, where we build research cohorts. And so for us, the way to do that was ensuring that we're building some parts of our value chain within the African ecosystem. We wanted this project to be owned by African scientists. That's how you build sustainability as well, to have African scientists leading discovery from the genomes of their population.
What questions do you hope to be able to answer?
The beauty about human genetics in today's world is that it's important for quite a lot of things, right? So one, there's evidence that human genetics-enabled drug discovery or genomics-enabled drug discovery leads to drug approvals, at a twofold rate than when you don't have genetic evidence. And so we believe that, by doing a lot of these types of studies, one, that we can develop new drugs that could treat cancers or cardiovascular disease in people of all races. The other thing that, having such a database can do, and discovery with such a database, is that it can help us begin to target diseases properly. Diseases have moved into subtypes, or now we are understanding rather that they are actually subtypes of various diseases. And then the third thing as well is safety of drugs. One of the issues we've seen is that because African populations, for example, have not been included in clinical trials, or rather, because clinical trials have been less diverse. Sometimes you're testing a drug on just a subset of the human population, and so you can't really tell the safety effects of that drug on a broader population. And so by being able to include more diversity in trials, you're then able to eliminate, hopefully, side effects in majority of people.
Mm-hmm. So I hear you saying that there are multiple ways that you could define success. Finding new medicines, new targets for medicines, but also figuring out who might benefit most from certain medicines, right?
Exactly, yes. And even figuring out new uses of existing medicines, right? So what we call finding new indications for a drug that already exists, or even a generic that's already in the market. We can, using this data set, find additional uses of those drugs. What it does, in general, it helps drive an efficient healthcare system that hopefully can be efficient enough, to drive prices, because now we can actually begin to find additional uses for compounds that, already out there.
So for 54 Gene, how will you define success then? Is it building the data set, or do you have certain goals for medicines that you want to be involved with as well?
For us, it's very important to us that this work changes or improves the healthcare and life sciences landscape within Africa to ensure that there is more infrastructure on the ground and there's more skilled workers on the ground and there are more jobs. And that, you have Africans being part of the drug discovery industry, because right now, Africans contribute, or the continent of Africa contributes to less than 1% of the drug discovery industry. So for us, seeing that ecosystem improvement and change, as well as seeing the ripple effects in how it improves the lives of people on the continent from a healthcare perspective, these are the three major ways that we are defining success.
Great. I think that's a great place to wrap it up. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
And now, we bring you an extraordinary story from Uganda, where our catalyst, Shimim Nabuma Kalisa, the founder and executive director of CHILL Artificial Intelligence Lab, is using drones and AI to screen women in remote villages for cervical and breast cancer. Now, her own mother died of cancer that wasn't diagnosed early enough, and Shimim herself is a breast cancer survivor. In her case, now doctors found the cancer in time. Her mission is to give other African women the same chance. It is, of course, another example of how cutting-edge technologies have become sufficiently portable, affordable, and available to benefit the world's most remote populations. Bloomberg TV and radio anchor Carol Massa caught up with Shimim before she headed out into the field.
Shimim, thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations on being a catalyst. You are someone who has been on the ground in your home country of Uganda. You've seen a problem, you have seen how it's impacted your community, and you've worked to fix it. And then as a result, you're really helping to change the world. So let's get to the problem you are trying to solve. You are entrepreneurial, you have several companies, but we want to talk about the work you're doing with CHILL. Tell us about the problem that you were looking to fix and how you went about it.
I founded this company after the unbearable pain that I went through as a breast cancer patient. Can you imagine? Cancers are one of the leading causes of death in the whole world, and yet they're not given priority. In only 2020 alone, more than 9.9 million people died of cancers. And to breast cancer specifically, more than 2.2 million women suffered breast cancer. And of these, more than 685,000 women died of breast cancer. Breast cancer is the leading cause of cancer death in the whole world. And this is worse in the developing countries, and Africa especially. This is because people have to move long distances from their homes to the hospitals to acquire services. And even when they reach the hospitals, the services are really very expensive. So it is very difficult for someone to screen for cancers in time. And with the information barriers, this makes it hard for people to acquire these cancer screening services in time. And with this puts the survival rate at a very minimal rate. Because of the pain that I went through as a breast cancer patient, I saw very many people on the sick bed dying of their cancers. And with this, I founded the company CHILL Lab, which offers cancer-related services using the power of artificial intelligence, that is automation, referrals, and also interpretation of lab and radiology reports. We offer these services at an affordable rate. Yes, I know that I would have been able to employ so many doctors, I would have been able to start so many hospitals. But without the power of technology, this cannot be able to provide services to every woman out there. So with the use of the artificial intelligence that we offer automated related services to women. For example, a woman could come to the hospital and is having breast cancer and want to know the effects of the drug they are taking. Would they have to exactly move to the hospitals? No, They'll just have to use the technology and using our platform so that they can be able to acquire these services. So this is what I'm talking about, that everyone can be able to access the services anywhere at any time so that their lives can be improved. And that is what Shield AI does.
You know, we do know with cancer in general for the entire world that early screening and detection can really determine in a big way the outcome of an individual, their success rate in terms of getting beyond it. And so you really made it possible for people to get that screening. It's something we take for granted, right, in the developed world, but in the developing world or in your community, it wasn't so easy to do.
Unlike for the developed nations, where the acquisition of cancer-related services is at their doorsteps, people don't have to move long distances. This is so different in the developing nations, where people have to move kilometers and kilometers to acquire cancer-related services. And by the time they come, that means they have endured so much pain that the cancer is already in the advanced stages and there is less that can be done about it. And thus the survival rate is very low.
You know, and I don't know if our audience knows this, but some of the statistics, patients of African ancestry have the poorest outcome, the shortest survival rates from cancer globally. Breast cancer is the most commonly diagnosed cancer among African females. In sub-Saharan Africa, breast cancer deaths have increased 70% since 2000, and the 5-year survival rate is less than 40% versus 86% in the United States. Tell us about the impact that you're having and the difference that you've seen as a result of the work that you're doing with Chill.
At the beginning, it was very difficult to convince someone to come and carry breast cancer screening when they're not having any pain. Actually, I lost almost hope because the first 50,000 automated referrals that we carried out, of these 25% had advanced breast cancer. That meant that the survival rate was very low. With this, we added the advocacy sensitization, that our team would sensitize people about the advantages of early cancer screening. And with this, there was an improvement, because in 2019, of the 500,000 customers of the automated referrals that we made, of these 20% were found with advanced breast cancer, which was an improvement because at first, very many people were found with advanced breast cancer, but now the rate had reduced. What did I learn from this? That with increased sensitization and increased acquisition of services at people's doorsteps, the rate at which cancers are diagnosed at a late stage will be decreased, and thus this will increase the survival rate of the people.
Technology has made this possible. Tell us a little bit about the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning, tele-oncology, how the technology that you're using that makes this all possible.
I always tell those around me that technology is like a newborn baby. When a family gets a newborn baby, there is joy, and that is technology. Technology comes with improved efficiency. Technology comes with improved accessibility. Technology comes with improved privacy. Technology comes with less error.
So, Shamim, what is next for you? Is there a transformative innovation that's coming down the pipeline that you're looking forward to that can help you with the work you're doing at Chill? What's next?
Yes, there is something new. In a few days from now, we shall be launching our new edition of a disabled being able to speak to a doctor. In this, a disabled person will be able to speak in sign language, and automatically it will be translated into audio, which will be understood by the doctor. And in the same way, the audio spoken by the doctor will automatically be translated into sign language so that the disabled can be able to understand. And with this, there will be proper communication between the doctor and the disabled.
Well, you've done a lot, and I know that there's certainly a lot more that we're going to see from you in the future, no doubt about it. Shamim, thank you so much. Shamim Nambuma, and congratulations again on being a catalyst for change.
So our next catalyst is the founder and CEO of life sciences venture capital firm Flagship Pioneering. He's also co-founder and chairman of the board at Moderna. Of course, the mRNA vaccine Moderna manufactures is helping put an end to the COVID-19 pandemic. Next up, Dr. Nuba Fayan wants to revolutionize the entire medical industry. The COVID vaccine is an example of how diseases can be deflected. Fayan imagines a whole new world where medicine can attack diseases even before they've made people sick. I was lucky enough to speak to Nuba last week and asked him how we can build a system that targets treatment pre-disease? Nubar, what a joy, what an honor it is to be here with you, to really think big right now for the New Economy Catalyst, to take us to the next what if question, because incredible where we've come already in terms of the 40 years where we first sort of started to see biotech companies looking at genetic engineering techniques, and now we've got the mRNA being able to, well, that messenger able to tackle COVID, but you now think could go on to tackle cancer as well. Where now in terms of the progress that you've made already?
Well, first, pleasure to be here. Yeah, indeed. Actually, I entered this field as a graduate student in 38 years ago. And so there were a handful of companies who were barely genetic and barely engineering, but actually had the great hopes of being able to make a new category of drugs. In their case, it was based on proteins. And roll the clock forward the 40 years, and we're now talking about the patient, the subject, making their own drugs inside their body for whatever purpose, based on giving the body a code, just like software, and instructing the body to make a drug of interest or a vaccine of interest. And that journey really has taken shape in the last decade, but it was based on a lot of work done ahead of time. First, there was 20, 30 years of experience in the protein way of doing it, which is much more complex, much more costly and slow, but nevertheless proved that you could actually have proteins work in the body as drugs. And then with the advent of DNA, genomic sequences, we understood the DNA code for things. And eventually we've used that code in the form of messenger RNA, and that's the part that Moderna pioneered starting 10 years ago, in order to now be able to properly design, formulate, administer, and deliver an effective message to the cells inside our bodies to be able to make a vaccine of interest, in this case for COVID.
Vaccine of interest for COVID. What is of interest for you? What barriers do you want to now break? What key illness that you feel just plights the world could you feel that this could be really useful?
Well, interestingly, if you go back a year and a half before COVID showed its perilous face, if I can say that, we had already tried this technology on 9 different infectious diseases and successfully raised antibodies in humans against all of them. These were things like Zika or CMV, a very, very dangerous virus for which we have no vaccine that's approved, or any number, RSV, any number of known diseases. So that work already proceeded, and we felt pretty comfortable that on the 10th one, we could at least get the body to make antibodies. On the other hand, we've also had, in parallel, years of work we've done in cancer, in autoimmunity, in cardiovascular disease, in each case taking 1 or 2 lead programs into human trials, and that's where they are today. So one thing is for sure that now with the evidence provided by the COVID-19 vaccine, we feel, I can't say we feel more optimistic because we were pretty optimistic, and more bold because the company has had a long history of being bold, but we feel that we have the resources and the relationships that would make this go faster, so that indeed we will apply this to cancer. But let me not forget to mention, we will apply this even more in an accelerated fashion for infectious disease, things like influenza, things like HIV, where, as a society, we've either accepted in HIV that there cannot be a vaccine. I don't believe that's true. Or that in influenza, there cannot be a good vaccine. So that the seasonal vaccine we take works 40, 50% of the time, and we consider that protection. Well, we just saw that we could do a lot better, and there's no guarantee, but the technology suggests that's possible. And maybe I'll just end by saying, I think the moment is really a moment for us to think about biotechnology in a more expectant way, in a more demanding way. I think this is an industry that has grown up largely in obscurity, where most things never worked. It was really complex, filled with jargon. And so, when a drug came out of it once every decade, people would feel like, wow, that's a major breakthrough. It doesn't have to be that way. And our hope, our expectation is what changes is that people expect much of what biotechnology does to work. And if it doesn't work, we learn and we improve. not that it's some kind of a lottery where it's supposed to work once in a while, but mostly not. That would be the internet moment, if you will, for biotechnology, the same as how internet made software industry come out of obscurity and become a consumer-facing technology sector. I think that's the moment that may be awaiting us.
What sort of time frame? How quickly can we have this internet moment? Can I be really demanding of what you guys are producing?
I would like the urgency of the moment and the demandingness of the moment not to subside, even as this pandemic hopefully gets further and further defeated. And the reason is that it is those conditions that allowed us to do, many folks, to do what was done. And I worry that if regulators, if the collaborative networks that exist between the government and the private sector, if private companies absolutely go back to doing what they're doing, then there's no reason to believe that it won't now take 5 more years than needed to do a vaccine. It will work half as well, and basically will struggle to find a way to even get the resources to do that type of development. I hope that is not what we go back to. That's a new normal that I don't wish to return to.
Talk to us, therefore, about what's in place, the barriers that have been broken, the relationships you formed as a private sector into the public sector. We know that you, as a private company, Flagship Pioneering, has been building up the resources that you say are now there. You've raised a new $3 billion in excess of dollar fund. But what now can government put in place? And I'm not just talking about US government, I'm talking internationally here. How do we ensure that you can go on to defeat cancer, influenza, some of the other key HIV that we were just mentioning, with this joined up approach that we currently now benefit from within the dire straits of a pandemic?
So it could just be that we all agree to keep the intensity going. I'm a little worried that if we keep our old mindsets, but then kind of hope for intensity, it's not going to last very long. But I think there is a shift in mindset that's also possibly upon us. And it could be a question as to whether governments and various other institutions and parties embrace it or not. And that is the area we call health security. The rough idea is the following. If you look at healthcare, one thing we've learned over the last year and a half, and we've known it all along as well, is that what we really mean is sick care, because we only actually avail ourselves of it when we get sick. And so a system that basically only works when there's disease seems to be only half of the solution, maybe less than half, if we compare it to our physical security. Imagine if the only way we ensured our physical security as a society was nuclear bombs and fighter planes and aircraft carriers, billion-dollar expenditures for these kinds of overwhelming force. Unfortunately, our Defense Department concerns itself with intelligence, with surveillance, with terrorism, with ideological combat, long before there's a big war. And you might say, well, what does that have to do with our health? I would invite us to think about why we're resigned to the notion that we are well until we get sick. And when we get sick, it's probably going to get worse and we're going to die. And in the meantime, we get some treatments. I've spent the last 38 years developing new treatments, new diagnostics. And as an innovator, it's always been hurtful to me that we can't actually work upstream of disease. So health security would be the mindset that says, why don't we ensure that disease is as far delayed or deflected as possible? And when we have disease, then by all means, some of the expensive treatments can be used sparingly. But I suspect that is a different paradigm where the cost of healthcare and the appropriateness of the tools being used for what the problem is can be very, very different over time. And that, I mean this globally. So you might say, well, that sounds like a fantasy. It doesn't need to be, because the last year and a half, actually, we started treating a threat as a matter of health security. We didn't call it that. We're now beginning to increasingly view it. So I foresee a moment where we look at this and say, you know what? We've been misdefining where medicine is needed. Medicine is needed upstream of disease, what we call kind of a pre-disease state. And by the way, that's not just for infectious disease. That's for cardiovascular disease, cancer. If we can identify pre-disease states, if we can intervene, not treat, intervene with these pre-disease states and delay the advent of the patient journey that we hear about, then I think we have a very different mindset. And frankly, something good will have come out of the pandemic, because the pandemic will have allowed society to actually have these tough discussions and say, why is it that we only care about our health when we lose it?
But Nubar, at what level do we need those discussions? Does this need to be a groundswell? The people on the street, the people who have been affected by this pandemic, to say, I demand more. Because at the moment, people are left up to exercise, eat well, drink well. Is it a lack of education that stops that? Because, or do we need help? Do we need government to say we need to demand more of this? We need to now frame it not as sick care, but as preventative care.
I think we need it all. We need the groundswell. We need people to accept less or be less accepting of the status quo. And I think coming out of this trauma, I hope that people will rethink just how vulnerable they found themselves. I think that governments should be realizing that they need to alter the social contract with those who are being governed such that they are offering forms of security of health, not just dealing with the after effects of losing it.
Do you think the conversations you're having with government at the moment means they are looking to change that social contract?
I think there's movements to that direction. I think during the G7, these were topics that were brought up. I know in the UK, in Europe, there are countries that have adopted new efforts to create new types of approaches to health. Very, very recently, I've spoken to several country leaders in the recent past about the need for this type of thinking. But it's not only up to them, because they are they govern and they have institutions. Those institutions tend to be conservative by definition, because that kind of is at least preservative. And you don't want to gamble with people's health, and you don't want to bring forward solutions that are not yet ready. On the other hand, unless there's a path forward, innovators and investors will not work on coming up with these solutions that might then indeed create a need for a different regulatory framework. So I think this is going to be a broader discussion. And by the way, the media has a big role to play in this, because in the last year and a half, the media has disproportionately talked about disease, spike, PCR, all these words that I think were relatively foreign. And now I hope they don't give that up. I hope that they keep the interest and say, why aren't we doing some of these things in other areas? Because that is what it's going to take for us to say, okay, what's the alternative? We've been fixated on, insurance and how healthcare is provided and who's paying for it. But actually, I think we've completely missed the boat on saying, why don't we take all this advanced technology and science, identify the prior few steps before we declare something a disease, act then, defend, deflect, and then go to the disease state. It's going to take different education, by the way. The whole medical establishment has to think about what its role is, because right now we train doctors to deal with disease. We don't train doctors to deal with this interface. By the way, health isn't the absence of disease. Health is the absence of pre-disease. And that's the part that we miss. We think we go from healthy, diagnosis, sick. Well, the biology doesn't work that way just because humans view it that way. There's a huge period in between that I think we can do something about. And here it is 2021, and we're beginning to try to do that.
Do we need to change the incentives, therefore? Certainly, many feel that incentives in the US healthcare are out of whack, but then it's not exactly working beautifully where it's government funded, for example, over in the UK, which I know well. Is there anywhere that you think there's a blueprint or the start of a blueprint to really get to where you need to see us go?
Well, I don't know that there's certainly the UK with a national health system has the beginnings of being able to potentially measure the consequences of experiments in this direction. So that's already, and I'd say the preconditions are correct in the UK, maybe some Scandinavian countries, and even Canada, where there is a national health system that should care. And if there are new offerings, new approaches, there's at least a way to track and have the information. Because in the US, very, very hard to find out. By the way, the reason in the US, insurance and generally people don't pay for any of this is because people change insurance systems on average every 3 years. So the effect of dealing with a pre-disease is a benefit to your competitor. I mean, I've been told this for years and years. And so that's something that's got to change. Now, unfortunately for society, but fortunately for this ideology, I would say that the higher healthcare costs continue to get, the less effective our healthcare system, the more we're going to be forced into considering these things. And so I hope the pandemic is a wake up, but I think our pocketbooks are going to be a permanent wake up, because we just cannot afford waiting for disease to deal with it permanently. It's got to change.
It's got to change. Nubar, leave us with one really exciting vision that you have. You've painted how this can, what you've worked on, what you've helped develop, what you've funded can help tackle from HIV to cancer next. But what about the flagship, the pioneering that you have? Where do you want to see your resources go right now to make real change that blows our minds?
Well, flagship pioneering, just to say in a very, very nutshell, is in the business of trying to foresee new platforms that could create a whole slew of new products affecting human health and the planet's health, sustainability. And in that regard, we're working on many, many different things, each of which, if they came to fruition, would be quite stunning. But I'll say as maybe a category I would look forward to is the role machine learning and artificial intelligence are playing in a dozen of our different projects, and the type of leaps that that's going to enable us to make. More so than in other industries, AI and machine learning allows us to deal with biological questions with the immense complexity inherent in them, because these are systems that evolve. These are not man-made systems and therefore have a logic to them. They don't have a logic to them, or at least if there was one, it's invisible to us. And these machine learning approaches have allowed us to be able to identify the changes that happen with disease, with treatment, with various genetic backgrounds in cells, in our bodies, in ways that we had no conception of before. And it's what's very exciting is that what results from that. And I think we'll be able to say more, know more, and do more about human physiology in the next year than we've been able to think about in the next 40, because of these new insights that are coming around. So I'm very excited by that. But equally, there are many other things that we're very excited about.
The tech in biotech. Nubar, what a joy to speak with you. Thank you so much for painting your vision. Nubar Afeyan, great to have some time. Stay well.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, wherever we look in the world of science and technology, Bloomberg New Economy Catalysts, they're there, compressing change that we thought would stretch out for decades into months or even weeks. Now, over the past 2 hours, we've seen dramatic examples of warp speed innovation in digital money and biotech. Tonight, we're going to look at the phenomenal growth of e-commerce, which is not only propelling a new era of consumer-led growth, but it's transforming the shape of cities. We'll wrap up our program with an hour on space. Yes, humanity's last and greatest frontier. For some, space is an escape from a burning planet. Our catalysts see space-based technologies as a solution to problems on Earth. Join us tonight, 8 p.m. ET or 8 a.m. tomorrow if you're in Beijing, Hong Kong, or Singapore, for the conclusion of Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. Thank you.